Stumbling by Joseph Crilly.
Gary Winnan had no pretense. You got what you saw, but you had to look close. I took a good look and I figured I'd give it a go.
Donna came to do Saturday work at the hedge nursery. And to begin with, she terrified me.
He lived with his parents, Logan and Merva, in a big house with massive trees round it near the Kinfolk Mill. They had a few bob. Logan owned garden centres and nurseries all over the place, including one just outside the town. And Gary was just different to what I knew.
Donna laughed as she worked, and she talked and she swore. She was a fireball of life. And as I dealt with the customers, she helped out in the greenhouses, and apparently she took a shine to me.
I came from off the Long Glen estate, which by comparison with the Winnings is like saying I lived in a rat hole on a rubbish tip. And we didn't have much bob at all.
If you knew the kind of person I was then, you'd be astonished that any girl, anybody, would take an interest in me. I certainly was.
Logan Winning, Gary's dad, always had his picture in the Gazette. Wherever the big knobs were hanging out, Logan was sure to be there. He was a case, Logan.
I first knew Donna when she was waitressing at the Spurnview Hotel. And I might be out there having a quiet drink with a rugby club gang, and she'd call over to me as they came in. "What about you, Logan? Yeah, I'll lead it." Oh, yeah. She's always been very funny. Always very chatty. And her conversation was that bit more articulate than you'd normally hear from a lassie of her, well, background.
Logan would come in with the rugby club ones and they'd drink whiskey and get hyped up and obnoxious. But it was all hot air. If you ignored the slabbering and talked back to them, you'd get loads of tips.
Donna would tell us how some prospective beau had vomited in her handbag, or how her sister had borrowed her underwear and had mislaid it. How do you mislay your underwear? And then the sister would make up these ludicrous excuses. I asked her if she wanted a weekend job at the garden centre, and she took the position and was great fun to have around. Gary's very lucky because Donna's a great girl. And the thing with Sean McElduff, I don't know. I knew it was wrong, but I was very lonely.
Gary's mother, Merva, she's a real head-turner, even though she's around the 50 mark. Stylish and slim and young-looking. She never liked me, but so what?
I convinced myself that I should exploit the situation with Donna, but I just couldn't gather the courage. Till one day, my mother came to the garden centre to borrow the van. When she walked past Donna and I in the forecourt, we were laughing our heads off about something, and she called me into the office. She said, "Who's that?" And I told her, and Merva said, "She's an RC." And I said, "I suppose she is." She said nothing about that, but she asked Logan to sack Donna. She said it was because Donna was holding the work back. This kicked off another big hullabaloo, but it was one of the rare battles that Logan won. Donna kept her job, but she was advised to keep out of Merva's way. I don't think I'd have been brave enough to ask her out if it wasn't for that incident. It spurred me on. Donna started out as a way of getting at my mother, and of course it was better than I'd ever expected. And when she broke off with me, I was nearly destroyed and spent a week in bed. 5 years later, I got Donna back and I married her, and that made me kind of happy, and it thoroughly annoyed my mother. So touché, sort of. Life with Donna's never simple, and certain things could never have been prophesied. Like the way Sean McElduff totally changed the way we were going along. I should probably thank him.
Apart from anything else, Gary had a car. And when you're 17 and you're living in this hole of a town, a fella with a car is a good starting point. On the road of life, that is. You know what I mean? The first time, I only went out with him for about 3 months. And I suppose one of the main reasons I quit him was that he hardly touched me. Well, then I started getting a load of grief from the fellas in our estate, and it was doing my head in, and that was the other reason I quit Gary. At the time, I said to the woman in the Sinn Féin Advice Centre, "Is there something the matter about me going with a Protestant fella? 'Cause there's people who seem to think it is a problem." Says she, "Far as I'm concerned, love, you could be courting a hairy baboon." I described what was going on, and here's her. "I'll have a wee word with somebody. There'll be no more aggravation." Some chance. See, the pros were already hacked off with these fellas over various stuff, nicking kegs and scrapping in the Gailey Club and all. So a couple of them got their heads busted and a stack of grief came out of it. And I wish I'd never opened my gob because it looked bad again me. My mate Paula said the whole thing was because they fancied me themselves and Gary being a prod was irrelevant. Tribal rituals, she said, and if this was the Amazon jungle, they'd be painting their bits blue and waving them under my nose, she said. Anyway, that sure have all near ruined their lives now. Jail or dead or alkies. And I am so glad. Except Sean McElduff, of course. He's doing just fine. I'll get to that.
I feel I should put things in perspective about the winnings and about this town and all that. You see, my great-grandfather had a brace of linen mills here in the days when the town was thriving. Dark, satanic industry all over the place. Now it's coming down with rancid chip shops and everything a quid shops and cheap off-licenses. And a population of pale-faced no-hopers weaned on beer and grease and hatred. The salt of the earth. Well, that probably sounds like I'm sneering, but maybe they could be the salt of the earth if they had jobs to go to. If there was purpose in their squalid lives. Well, that's definitely a bit sneery, but what can you do? Of course, the winnings are no longer linen lords. I make my living from horticulture these days, but I believe the name still carries weight locally. And if you have a bit of clout, there's no harm in using it for the good of the community. Not that this community has a baldy clue what's good for it. The Alliance Party asked me once if I consider standing locally on their ticket, as a moderate. But when I looked into it, and I saw how many councillors they had, none, and how many votes they usually polled, not very many, I thought I'd save myself the embarrassment. Besides, I've learned that a man can only do so much, and that it's always good to be supported in stressful times. Unfortunately, my wife, Merva, often wasn't around. And it might have been different if I'd some kind of emotional backing from Merva, and I realised there's little to be gained from apportioning blame. Even so.
I never knew Donna at school. I mean, apart from the fact that she's supposedly a Roman Catholic and I'm supposedly a Protestant, it would have been difficult. Because when I was 8, I was taken out of the local primary school at Upper Ballyvilla, which had been good enough for my older brother and my older sister, and I was sent to a prep school in Yorkshire in England. And I didn't want to go to boarding school in England. So for the first 6 months, I went on communication strike, and I barely uttered a word to anyone. The school got a child psychologist in, and I still kept my mouth shut, but I scrawled her a note that said, "I want to go home to Northern Ireland now, please." The shrink was horrified, and she made the school send for Logan to come and get me. When we got back, my mother was defiant. "You don't have to scuttle around looking after the wee brat, Logan. You don't know what it's like." She could have kept her voice down. That's what Donna said when I told her.
Gary's car was silvery grey and smelt lemony inside, and it went from here to there and back again. Well, to begin with, that's all I was interested in. If that sounds cynical, it's meant to. It's the truth. But it was nice. I'd meet him up at the War Memorial, and we'd get out of here and go to where nobody knew us. We even went over the border to Carlingford and would go for meals, and it was romantic. Well, nobody I knew went for meals. A gravy chip on the way home, maybe, but to be honest, after a while he got to be a bit boring. I hate saying it, but it's true. And he definitely was a bit unnatural. You see, with other fellas it was clear enough, like iron drawers on, and they had magnets for hands. And it seemed like Gary was unnaturally disinterested in plain natural things. It never struck me that he'd hardly seen a woman close up in his life. I reckon maybe he was just too nice. It was definitely very confusing. It was like me and Guy were just two separate species.
I pleaded with Logan not to send me back to boarding school. I insisted that I could live on cheese sandwiches and sugar smacks. I knew how to work the washing machine, and I'd clean my room whether it needed it or not. I was 8 years old. And I was hopeful because he looked mighty troubled, and he went back to Merva, but they got into an even more gigantic screaming match. "I want to live, Logan. I want a life," Merva yelled like a maniac till he backed off. Then he disappeared altogether for a while. I was worried that she'd chopped him up in the ensuite bathroom or something. My brother Carl said Logan was staying with Uncle Roger. He'd run off to avoid any heaviness because the parents had decided to divorce, and it was all down to me, he said. Oh, my Lord. I was ecstatic. What a result. My perfect dream. No such luck. They patched it up. Carl said Dad had a brilliant solicitor and Merva would have ended up skint if she'd gone through with it. He said she'd manipulated Dad with fellatio and that he got it so rarely that he would agree to anything for fellatio. I never discovered how Carl was privy to such details, but at the end of the week, I was sent back into exile. And later, when I thought about it, I was incensed that Logan could have sold me so cheaply. I was there until I was 13 when I was moved to Stewart College. I left school at 16 and refused to have anything more to do with institutions. And my father took me on to work at the garden centre. I love working with greenery. I know my stuff now and I could tell you anything you need to know. And inevitably, I prefer plants to flesh and blood people. Except for Donna, of course. I've always been keen on her.
Back when I was 18, I told Gary that I didn't want to go out with him anymore. He was dead upset and he cried. And he said, I understand. I was like, touching, I suppose. But I hadn't actually explained anything that he could have been trying to understand. Because the truth was, I had a better offer from a fella with Kawasaki. Gary stopped at the lights and he kissed me on the cheek, and just looking at his wee face near broke my heart. Then I went home and got my jeans on, and the fella with the quacker picked me up and took me for a burn round the long glen. The motorbike bloke lasted about a month, and then it was this boy with a customised van, room in the back and all that. Mind you, he hummed of engine grease. Then there was a fella with a souped-up yoke, CB headlights, flared archers and all. Transport's the main concern when you're 18. I can't emphasise that enough. Well, I left school and I got a filing job in Craigavon Hospital, and I worked there for 2 years. Till me and my mate Paula went to England, and we got jobs in a hotel in Bournemouth. And we had a row because we were living in each other's pockets. So Paula went home and I went up to London. And I got office work, and I met this fella called Clive, who was half African and half Chinese. I moved in with him in Hackney for a year till his brother tried to get me to work in a massage parlour, and I told Clive, and he said his brother was only messing. And Clive started smoking crack and he hit me, and I told him to F off. And he hit me again and I left. I decided I would have to come home and sort things out. Mainly my head. A week after I got back, I was buying a lotto ticket in the garage when I met Gary again. It was nearly 5 years to the day since he dropped me at the lights. Well, to be honest, it was Gary that worked out the 5 years thing. I'd near forgot he ever existed. Anyway, time flies when you're treading water, and it was good to see him again, because he was lovely to me. It was just what I needed. Anyway, we started going out again, and didn't he ask me to get hitched? And I said, yeah.
When Gary and Donna got married, they lived nearby in the main annex. We have an enormous house here that my great-grandfather built, and I divided it up a few years ago into separate dwellings. So if I was ever lonely, I thought it would be no problem when Merva was away. Oh, they were just a wee skip across the garden. Yes, indeed. I used to imagine that Merva liked coming home to me. She'd often come back through the kitchen door with a big smile on her face. But when I mentioned this to her, she dismissed it. She said her smile was down to seeing Paisley again. That's the cat. He's a big soft thing. And she said she hankered after him when she was in Scotland. We had a cosy familiarity, Merva and myself. Our eldest boy, Carl, is married in Edinburgh and has 3-year-old twins. So when Merva got the chance, she was over there doing her Scottish thing. And she'd have loved to go permanently. She said, this place is on its knees and the Republicans are pouring in like raw sewage. We wouldn't have to worry if we were living in Scotland. All that attitude does is epitomise selfishness, I told her. No, she never had an answer to that, but she'd clear off for 5 weeks at a time. She often threatened to take Paisley with her, but I suspected that if he went, she'd never be back. Paisley was my hostage, and sometimes he was like the only family I had. Because it was hard to feel related to Gary. Well, he never really seems to have connected with the rest of the human race. And we did our best for him. We sent him to good schools, and he muddled through, and he was a wee sweetheart when he was small, but now he's... Actually, he could be bloody strange, and sometimes it seemed that Merva couldn't stand him. No, I shouldn't say that. She could stand him. He's her son, for heaven's sake. But she just found him odd. Like I did, I suppose. But Donna, his wife, is a lovely-looking, good-hearted girl. Witty, too. You know, that real earthy wit that the people here have. Well, Donna has it. She's lovely. She really is.
My grandparents, Merva's folks, are ordinary working people from Sandy Row in the city. Grandad was a gardener in Botanic Gardens till he retired, and even though he's in a temperance lodge, he gets buckled in the Salvagers Club every Friday night. Granny worked in a shoe shop in Cornmarket, and Merva has 2 older sisters and a younger brother. And I barely ever met any of these people when I was a child, because Merva abhorred the fact that she was as common as muck. She was a junior in a bank beside the City Hall in Belfast, where Logan was a customer. And Logan was in one day for a meeting when Merva was sent in with tea and biscuits. Apparently she eyed him up and down and then lit on him like a biblical plague. Logan says the smell of money and breeding off him must have overpowered her. She poured the tea, reached him a bicky, and just kind of absorbed him, he says. And she got a firm agreement that he would meet her after work. A glass of beer for him, and a Liebfrau Milch for her, and Logan's fate was sealed in the Morning Star in Pottinger's entry. Scary. And it carried on getting scarier, because it wasn't long before they were married, and Carl and Lorraine had arrived. Logan and Merva's young lives had become perfectly balanced, and they were never out of the Ulster Tatler for being utterly fantastic. And things were still swinging along nicely a good while later when I turned up. Basically, I screwed the whole thing up by being alive. Donna made me promise never to say that again.
Me and Gary got hitched at the council registry office, next door to where they complain about the bin men. The wedding room's not a cathedral, but it's all right. I caught my ma sprinkling holy water on my wedding outfit the night before, 'cause she wanted me to get married in St. Frank's. But when it came to it, she didn't make much fuss. She likes Gary and she had a great time at the reception, and her and my dad got wired into the brandy. My ma and dad are good steam when they're drunk. They did a brilliant duet of Strangers in the Night. The winning connection were dead subdued, and even Logan was letting on to be some kind of Puritan. They were mostly all the way home by 5:15 in the afternoon. Talk about pleasure seekers. Naturally, our one stayed the course, and we piled in the hotel disco in the evening. That's when I ran into Sean McElduff again. On my wedding day. Don't. I know.
The Mexican honeymoon was a big success, and even Merva was there to welcome them back. Oh, they brought us pottery and Manzanillo chocolate, and they were tanned and relaxed. Well, things were upbeat for a day or two. Then Merva disappeared off somewhere, and Donna and Gary got on with being married. It was 5 weeks after the matrimonials, and they'd been home for about a fortnight. I'd been left to my own devices again, and I'd only seen them a handful of times. On the Tuesday evening, I locked up at the garden centre, and I drove to the rugby club for a committee meeting. These affairs were always either bad-tempered or boring, and were like having your brain fricasseed. A pre-op anaesthetic was essential. I was hiding in the corner, unwinding over a scotch, reading the Belfast telly, when a Beetle, a red one, new style, pulled into the car park, and a tall, good-looking young chap got out of it. I knew that fresh playing talent was on the agenda, so my curiosity was aroused. When he came into the bar, I gave him a friendly nod, and he came over and introduced himself. Sean McElduff, sure enough, a prospective player. He'd been invited to the club by the vice-chairman, who was his boss at work. He joked openly about Catholics being rare in the rugby club. He mentioned how he was a long-term Gaelic footballer and how his switch would rattle the die-for-Ireland bigots among the GAA men. We chatted for 5 or 10 minutes, then I left him and went along to the committee room. Sean was sparkling company, and we got along fine. But I did feel as if he'd sapped something vital from me. And that feeling got worse. When Sean was introduced at the committee meeting, there was a good deal of hypocritical fawning because he was, well, you know, the wrong sort. But he presented himself well, and his sporting record spoke for itself. and it was agreed that if he could switch codes effectively, he'd be a consideration for the first 15. He thanked us very kindly, and he left. At first, it had been fascinating to watch him seduce the committee with his self-assurance, but the melancholy continued to flood my senses. I'd listened to the funny, serious tone Sean had used, ideal for the occasion. I'd watched how his relaxed gestures demonstrated that he was in control. I'd noted the handsome jawline, the tasteful casual clothes, the American hiking boots. And for some reason, he'd begun to make me feel like I was nothing. I couldn't help it, and I couldn't stop it. My mind went galloping, and I pictured all the capable young folk like Sean whose lives lay ahead of them. And I thought of Gary and how he had Donna, so lovely and so alive. And I compared these people to myself. I had Paisley the cat, a near-empty fridge, and the microwave. I had rubbish to watch on the TV, and I was as miserable as be damned. I felt pathetic and useless and old. I left the club, but I didn't go home. I drove out to the garden centre again to try to calm myself down.
The whole time I was in Mexico, I thought about how I'd met Sean McElduff on my wedding day. It was in the evening. I'd been coming out of the ladies at the disco in the Spurn View Hotel. I didn't get hitched in a big white number or anything, but I had a nice dress with a veil and a load of flowers pinned to my shoulder. Real flowers they were, not imitation ones. I looked over and Gary was sitting in the corner talking politely to my cousin Kay from Blackwater Town, who's on the shelf. And I was pushing through the bar when somebody leaned over and said right into my ear in a real husky Russell Crowe voice, "What about you there, Donna?" I looked at this fella's face, and he had a real wicked glint in his eye. I still didn't recognise him, till he said, "Do you not know me?" And it clicked. And I was like, actually, I was right and annoyed, because the last time I seen Sean McElduff, he was with his scabby mates on the estate, and they were giving me dog's abuse. I near spat on him. "You have a cheek," I said, and I walked on. I was at the top bar ordering a triple rum and coke when this arm reached over the top of me and paid for it. It was Sean again, and he said, "I'm awful sorry about the unstuffed on time." I got talking to him, and he softened me up. He told me he'd got on a scheme and did some courses and was working in the admin for the DOA. He bought one of those new houses in Scatterburn, and he'd split up with a girl a month before. She collected the last of her stuff that day. He said he hardly saw his old buddies, and if he heard about them, it was in the Gazette, in the bit where it says who's been up in court. And he swore in his granny's grave that he never said a single thing to me back when his mates were being mousy. He said that the probies overreacted, and that anybody who knew Gary said he was an all-right bloke. He asked me about the wedding, and I looked him straight in the eyes, and here's me. "What wedding?" And he laughed, and I laughed, nervously. You wouldn't need to be a mind reader to pick up that signal there. We'd been back from Mexico a couple of days when I told Gary I was going over to my sister's because I hadn't seen her since the wedding. And he said okay, and I got on the phone to arrange things. As soon as the number came up in my mobile, I knew what was actually on my mind. But I was still, what you might call, in denial. Anyway, I rang it, and when Sean answered, I was like, "Oh, sorry, wrong number." But straight away, he was like, "Donna, what about you? Did you bring me a sombrero?"
To begin with, Donna and I tried to fit into each other's lives, but it never worked out. This was largely because I had no social calendar, and she had a crammed full one. It was also because her friends were upfront and brash, and frankly, they intimidated me. And since I had no friends to speak of, Donna fitting in with my life wasn't an issue. So we enjoyed each other alone together and had separate existences otherwise. Naturally, I'd have been happy just being with Donna, but unfortunately, she's not that kind of animal. Or is it fortunately? Who knows?
The first night Sean picked me up from under the trees outside the Kinfolk Mill. And both of us were pretending like mad that we were just going for an innocent drive. We had a good laugh and nothing, happened. We just chatted and had a nice time. I always knew he would never replace Gary. The second time was a week later. I went down to Belfast to look at kitchen units, and I told Gary I was going into Madison's for a drink with some girls I used to work with. Except there was no girls. Just me and Sean. We had a lovely night just yakking and messing about. We got the last train and made it look like we just bumped into each other, because there was always plenty of snoopers about. Not that we had anything to worry about. We never so much as kissed. The third time, he arranged to pick me up after he'd been at the rugby club. That was the night it all went off.
The nursery at the garden centre is where I feel most in control and feel happiest. I had a big pot of blue delphiniums starting to flower in the office. I lay back in my chair and poured a whiskey. I focused on the flowers and mulled over the haphazard construction of my life, and I attempted to make sense of it all. I loved my wife, and I felt that my wife loved me, and that we were happy and fortunate. Then after we had the first 2 kids, it changed. All I needed was some closeness. Not boudoir gymnastics, just some gentleness. I remember saying to her, "Do you want a wee cuddle, Merva? Share some warmth." And she looked so disgusted, and she said, "See that, Logan?" And she pointed at the radiator. "That's not an ornament. It's oil-fired central heating." Well, that set the ongoing tone for our life of love and marriage. Occasionally, Merva would drink too much vino, and events would take place. Gary was the product of such a night. We'd been to a boozy reception at the Farmers' Show in the King's Hall, and when we got home that night, Merva was happy to be my wife.
The night had reached crisis point. Donna left the house after we'd had a wee bit of a row about a new sofa. After she left, I did a lot of thinking. I was aware, for instance, that I wasn't as sexually experienced as Donna, but she told me that I was bound to improve, the implication being that I couldn't get any worse. I also knew I'd have to be more communicative, and I knew that she could probably teach me something there too, because she's a champion talker. And even though I suspected that she never took anything seriously, including being married to me, I concluded that as long as she was able to have a certain amount of freedom, then she would be constant, and life would be trouble-free. I decided to let her buy the green leather sofa.
When Gary was born, something new started to happen. Merva became more blatant, more cynical, I suppose. She'd present herself to me if she wanted something, and the conjugal rights became something to barter over, for a new car, for an upgraded holiday, as compensation for her making me send Gary away to school. All in all, I kept believing that somehow we did love each other. Didn't we? When I stood up, the bottle was half empty and I was teetering a wee bit. I looked up, parked the car around the back of the garden centre, and I set off home on foot.
Sean drove us out to the gardens at Castle Morrison. We sat in the car park eating chips and drinking pineapple-laden vodka, and I thought for sure nobody would recognise us out there. When Merva strolled past the front of the car, and she had company. She looked straight at us, and I said, "Oh, Mummy, Daddy, that's Merva." And Sean said, "She's well kept for an old doll." And she clearly wasn't what he was expecting, for his tongue was near hanging out. And the fella Merva was with was a slick-looking client, clean-cut, in his 40s, well-dressed, nice eyes. And when she said something to him, he glanced back at us and looked wary. Actually, he looked completely trousers down. When they disappeared towards the lily ponds, I was going to wet myself with nerves if I didn't get to the toilet pronto, so I ran for it.
When I left the garden centre to walk home, there was still some light in the western sky. So I took a shortcut across the butterfly meadow by the old derelict rectory.
When I came back to the car, was a Merva standing at the driver's side talking to Sean. And they were laughing and seemed to be getting on great. Her companion was nowhere to be seen. As I got in, Merva was handing Sean her mobile number on a bit of paper, and he was saying, "Don't worry now, Mrs. Winning. I'll look into it when I get into the office tomorrow morning." Then she nodded at me and half smiled and said, "See you later, Donna." That was all she said to me before she left. I was stunned. But Sean told me not to worry. He said he had covered up, and it was never mentioned that she was supposed to be in Scotland.
The Reverend used to keep such a lovely garden at the rectory, and I got distracted nosing around in the rockery and poking about in the bamboo thicket.
Later that night, we drove back to the town, parked the car behind the old rectory, and Sean swept me off my feet. It was going to happen sooner or later.
As I was bending down to examine a clump of red erica, a noise made me look over the wall into the stable yard. A few feet away, a car was parked by the old harness room. One of the new Beetles, a red one. I'd looked at it earlier. It was unmistakably Sean McElduff's car. As I tried to figure out why McElduff's car would be at the rectory, the passenger door opened and somebody got out. The light inside the car showed the face perfectly. Donna. She took a quick look round and I thought she'd spotted me, but what she did next told me that that was most unlikely. She lifted her dress and kind of wriggled out of her, smalls. Then she stuffed them into the pocket of her jacket and got back into the car. I could hear laughter, male and female, coming from the car, and I was rooted to the spot. In shock and excitement, I can't deny that I was also excited. A form of soberness took a grip of me. I made my way back to the road and quickly went home. When I got back, I sat for a good while, shaking with nervous confusion. Then I went outside into the garden with a dish of cat food to look for Paisley. I was calling, "Puss, puss, puss," when Donna came out of the darkness and nearly knocked me flying, and I had to grab onto her for a second to steady myself. I was jolted as a great charge of her personal aroma rushed into my nostrils. I felt that every one of my nerve endings had instantly become illuminated like a starlit sky.
Huh?
Nice night, Logan.
I saw you with Sean McElduff.
How do you know Sean McElduff?
Come on into the house.
What?
Come on. She stopped for a second or two to weigh up the situation before she followed me in.
It was nearly midnight. I was sitting in the kitchen with the lights off and the door to the garden open and having a think, when I figured I would ring Donna on her mobile and tell her my decision about the green leather sofa. As it connected, I suddenly realized that I could hear it. She had this Mary J. Blige tune on her phone that nobody else had, that I'd know anywhere, and I could hear it nearby. I did redial, and I stepped out into the garden we share with my parents. Their kitchen door is 20 paces from ours. I listened and I followed the tune, across the garden, to Merva and Logan's open kitchen window. When I hit redial again and looked through the window, I could see, by the overspill from the hall light, Donna's phone flashing on the table. And I could see her pink furry keyring beside it, and I could see her decappa sweatshirt over the chair. And I thought, that's odd.
Donna and I sat in the lounge chit-chatting like we were at a tea party. I told her Sean was going to play rugby for us, and she said he was a sharp blade and should go far. And there was no mention of anything untoward, until she said that Gary would be wondering about her, and she made to go. And I blurted it out. "I saw you in his car at the old rectory, and you weren't swapping football stickers." And maybe I said it in a harsh tone, possibly because I was still drunk, or maybe because she was playing it dead cool.
Keep your hair on, Logan. I haven't murdered anybody.
Well, Gary mightn't regard it so inconsequentially.
What he doesn't know won't hurt him.
Is it her secret?
Sean might have to be in on it too.
But you definitely don't want me to tell Gary. And she gazed at me like I was a tiresome child. Then she said in this whispery, weary way,
What's this actually all about, Logan?
I dissolved into floods of tears and I flung myself at her. I knelt on the floor in front of her and pushed my head into her lap, and I bawled, and tears poured out of me, and she stroked my head, and I could feel the heat from her body, and it felt tremendous. It felt like more than that. It felt like it was the right place to be. I stayed there, gasping and trembling until my tears had stopped. A mist had cleared, and I'm sure we were both wondering what the hell was going to happen next, when she gave this wee, disconsolate sigh. Well, this irked me, and I said to myself, For God and Ulster, Logan. And I took the initiative.
I was under the influence and it all happened so quickly. Your Honour, that's a cliché, I know, but it's true. My head was going like the clappers as well as being right and drunk. I was confused and worried and I was a bit scared. And this is what my brain must have been saying to me. It was saying, Logan could ruin your life. You might have a nice life with Gary, but Logan could make sure that it crashes and burns. Gary will be so upset that he will never want to see you again. Gary is totally devoted to you and he thinks you're wonderful. Logan is obviously not getting any and Merva is doing the dirt on him. Actually, you would be within your rights to feel sorry for him. This could be your good deed for the day. In fact, this kind of good deed should cover you for months, if not years. My brain never got as far as reckoning what the consequences of all this might be. It rarely does. And by the time my brain had figured it all out, Logan had started without me. In fact, judging by the way he was moving and by the sounds coming out of him, he was near finished. His mouth was by my right ear, and he was sucking in air like an industrial cleaner, and he was going, "Oh, Donna, Donna, Donna," under his breath in a sort of high-pitched whimper like a hungry pup. And the chair I was positioned on had started by the sideboard and was now halfway across the parquet floor. I was hoping the tiles weren't getting scratched. My eyes were tight shut as Logan came to the end of his business, but I opened them at the sound of the front door closing.
I called the house and got the answering machine. Then I went round the front and was wondering whether to ring the doorbell when my mother arrived. She was supposed to be in Edinburgh, but when I said, "Mum, I thought you were in Edinburgh," she just said, "You thought wrong." When she opened the front door, I followed her in.
Merva was standing just inside the lounge door with a look on her face that was half a grin and half a smirk. Gary was behind her, but he had his head in his hands and he was looking at the ground. He was probably crying. Logan was oblivious. He was shoving against me that fast, he was in a blur. It was lucky that the chair got wedged against a mat on the floor. And just as he let an enormous grunt out of him, I shunted him off me, stumbled across the slippy floor and I ran for it. And as I was moving, I could hear Merva saying, "Hello, Logan," and I heard Logan roaring like a wounded bull. I ran straight up the stairs and into the first floor bathroom and I locked the door and I lay on the floor and I cried my eyes out.
We walked into the lounge and saw what we saw. My father and my wife. No matter how you look at it, it's weird. Logan pulled up his trousers and sat down. I sat down as well and Merva stayed standing. "Where did Donna go?" she said suddenly. Nobody answered her. And she went up the stairs.
Merva knocked on the bathroom door and said, "I better talk to you, Donna." When I let her in, she sat on the toilet seat and I sat on the mat. And her forehead was screwed up and she looked like she was thinking really hard. I sat in silence for a while, till it occurred to me to get the first dig in, and I says to her, "Who was your man at Castle Morrison?" Her face scarcely moved, and she never even glanced sideways at me, but she said, "Another one on the list." Then she sighed. "He was a novelty item, and now he's history," she said. She said it like she was sad, and I remember thinking, what's wrong with her? I'm the one up the creek without a paddle. Then she perked up, like she thought of something. She said, "Donna, you have handed me my get-out-of-jail-free card. I've no idea what the hell is going on with you and Logan, and you and that young fella in the red car, but..." And she stopped, and she looked kind of earnest, and she said, "Please try to make Gary happy. Just be discreet and string him along, but be good to him. He won't mind. He's a straightforward character like his father, and he'll take it at face value. I could never be good to him. I was unhappy and I resented him too much. I don't know if it's too late now to change that, but maybe we should try." I said, "I love Gary." And my voice was like a wee girl's. "Oh, I think he's a fantastic fella," I said. And Merva said, "Against all odds, he probably is." And she said, "Do you feel guilty about anything?" And I thought for a second and I said, "I'm not sure." And she said, "I could have been a better mother to Gary, but it's my life and there's still time to make amends." And I said, "Are we similar people then?" And she laughed and she said, "I think we are. And maybe that's why we've never got on. A couple of wee millies on the make." And I laughed too and I said, "Sure, what's wrong with that?" As she went to leave, she turned and said again, be good to him. And I promised her I would. And I meant it. I went downstairs. Gary was on his own in the lounge. He was even sitting in the chair with me and Logan. You know. I took him by the hand and we walked over to our place. I told him about Sean McElduff and how he meant nothing to me, and that was the truth. And he forgave me, and then he talked to me about boarding school and how I was the best thing that ever happened to him. And I cried. Then we took a shower and we washed the night off us and we made love real gently for hours. Something new had emerged. And it was a good thing. God, life's strange. The next day, I meant to go directly to the doctor for the morning after pill, but we stayed in bed and sent for pizzas and we watched videos and we cuddled and laughed, and for some peculiar reason, we were happy.
It took about 5 months to get the paperwork sorted out, and in the end, it was all settled amicably. Merva got a lump sum and the car, and she got the holiday house in Rostrevor that she could either live in or sell, and as a result of this difficult process, Merva and I became friends, probably for the first time. We agreed to help each other out, but we wouldn't smother each other. And eventually I came to accept that I didn't have to be lonely, and I didn't have to be frustrated. And I wondered why I never knew that that possibility had existed before. I had one brief conversation with Gary about what happened. He forgave me, and I accepted his forgiveness, and that was that. He's happily distracted anyway, since Donna is 5 months pregnant. Yes, she is, and stop calculating. It's either mine or Sean McElduff's or Gary's. And if it's mine or Gary's, then it's the same gene pool, and we're fine about that. It's got a 1 in 3 chance of being McElduff's, and of course, good, healthy ascendancy seed is likely to triumph over upstart seed any day. That's what we're telling ourselves, privately. Actually, that's what I'm telling myself. To be honest, it's a tough one to discuss. I saw Merva yesterday in my solicitor's office. She looked beautiful and was friendly and chatty. We signed the last of the paperwork and a nice bottle of Chablis was opened. She apologized again for putting me through such a hard time, and I said again that I was as much to blame as she was. We talked about the good times. She said that we'd been a top team, and I agreed, although I said it was hard not to feel sad. She told me that she was positive that I would be fine, and the last thing she said was, "You have happiness in you, Logan. I wish I could say the same for myself." And there was a sort of defeated look in her eyes. I nodded, not knowing what to reply, but I felt a little sorry for her. She emptied her glass, shook hands all round, and left. The office overlooks Donegal Place in Belfast. I sipped at the wine as I watched her come out of the building. As she crossed the road, she was talking into her mobile phone. When she got to the corner of Castle Street, a car appeared and stopped at the curb for her to get in. It was a red Beetle, one of the new fashionable ones. Merva got into the car, and it drove off up Royal Avenue. I turned away from the window and began thinking about something else entirely.
In Stumbling, Donna was played by Tyra Lynn O'Neill, Gary by Frankie McCafferty, and Logan by Owen Rowe. Stumbling was written by Joseph Crilly and directed in Belfast by Tanya Nash.